Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andre Miles, along with Mr. Jeremy Davis, and we are the founders of the Take a Stand movement. And today's talk is called Somebody Has to Know What I'm Talking About. When I talk about what happened in the early part of the 20th century in 1907, when J.P. Morgan, a private New York banker, published a rumor that a competing unnamed large bank was about to fail. It was a false charge, but customers nonetheless raced to their banks to withdraw their money in case it was their bank. And as they pulled out their funds, right, the banks lost their cash deposits and were forced to call in their loans. People therefore had to back their mortgages to fill the banks with income while going bankrupt in the process. The 1907 panic resulted in a crash that prompted the creation of, watch this, the Federal Reserve, a private banking cartel with the appearance of an independent government organization. Now, effectively, it was an action by elite bankers in order to control the industry. Somebody has to know what I'm talking about when I talk about how in 1913, when signed into law, the Federal Reserve would loan and supply the nation's money, but with interest, okay? So you have to know that the more money it was able to print, the more income it generated for itself. Now dig this, by its very nature, the Federal Reserve would forever keep producing debt to stay alive. It was able to print America's monetary supply at all, regulating its value to control valuation. However, inflation had to be held in check. Somebody has to know what I'm talking about when I talk about the Federal Reserve and when it doubled America's money supply within 5 years. And then in 1920, it called in a mass percentage of loans. Watch this, over 5,000 banks collapsed overnight. And then 1 year later, the Federal Reserve again increased the money supply by 62%. But in 1929, it again called the loans back in altogether as a group. Only this time, the crash of 1929 caused over 16,000 banks to fail, an 89% plunge on the stock market. The private and well-protected banks within the Federal Reserve system were able to snap up the failed banks at pennies on the dollar. Ask me what happened next. Go ahead and ask me. I got time. Okay. Well, since you asked, what happened was the nation fell into the Great Depression, and in April 1933, President Roosevelt issued an executive order that confiscated all gold bullion from the public. Watch this. Those who refused to turn in their gold would be imprisoned for 10 years, and by the end of the year, the gold standard was abolished. What had been redeemable for gold became paper legal tender, and gold could no longer be exchanged for cash as it had once been. Somebody has to know what I'm talking about when I talk about how later in 1971, President Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard altogether, right? Therefore, no longer trading at the internationally fixed price of $35. Now watch this, the US dollar was worth whatever the US decided it was worth because it was, and I quote, as good as gold, end quote. It had no standard of measure and became the universal currency. Treasury bills or short-term notes and bonds or long-term notes replaced gold as value. Right? Promissory notes of the U.S. government and paid for by the taxpayer. Additionally, gold could not be traced because it was exempt from currency reporting requirements, unlike the fiduciary that based upon trust monetary systems of the West. That was not in America's best interest. Somebody has to know what I'm talking about when I talk about how after the Great Depression, private banks remained afraid to make loans. So Roosevelt created Fannie Mae, a state-supported mortgage bank. It provided federal funding to finance home mortgages for affordable housing. Hold on. Now, it only gets better. Watch this. In 1968, President Johnson privatized Fannie Mae, and in 1970, Freddie Mac was created to compete with Fannie Mae, and both bought mortgages from banks and other lenders and sold them on to new investors. See, somebody has to know what I'm talking about when I talk about the post-World War II boom and how it created an American flush on cash assets with its military-industrial complex. War exponentially profited the U.S. and unlike any empire in history, it shot to superpower status. But it failed to remember that historically, whenever empires rose, they also fell in direct proportion. Americans can now afford all the modern conveniences, exporting their manufactured goods all over the world. Only after the Vietnam War, the U.S. went into an economic decline. But people were reluctant to give up their elevated standard of living despite the loss of jobs, and production was increasingly sent overseas, right? And it was a sense of delusion and entitlement that kept Americans on the treadmill of consumer consumption. That concludes part 1 of 4. Please click on part 2 and continue. I would like to say thank you for your time and attention. I love you all in Yeshua. Continue blessings. The Take a Stand movement.